Welcome to Channel Deep in Moments. Today's topic: France withdraws from anti-Russian coalition. Macron exposes U.S. conspiracy. According to Russian media reports, NATO will hold a nuclear deterrent exercise between October 17 and 30, which will involve 14 countries and more than 60 aircraft of various types, and the US B-52 strategic bomber will also participate. In the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia and the West game white-hot, NATO held a large-scale nuclear strategic force exercise, is undoubtedly a nuclear deterrent to Russia. It is reported that the location of the NATO joint military exercise will be held in the host country Belgium, as well as the North Sea and the United Kingdom. Although NATO claims that this is a routine nuclear strategic force exercise, which has been planned for a long time, the relevance of the exercise is very clear. Russia's troop deployment, in addition to direct combat forces in the direction of Ukraine, also has heavy forces in Northern Europe, the Baltics and Poland to deter and defend against NATO. NATO's large-scale troop build-up and exercises in the direction of Western Europe, as well as large-scale nuclear strategic force exercises, are aimed at distracting Russia's attention and keeping a lid on Russia's troop deployments and relieving pressure on the battlefield in Ukraine. Over the past few days, Russian air and space forces have been conducting precision strikes against military command and energy facilities in Ukraine's capital Kyiv, Kharkov, and Odessa, undoubtedly straining the spirits of both sides and worsening the regional security situation. On October 13, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Borrelli threatened that a Russian nuclear strike on Ukraine would trigger a firm and forceful response from NATO, which would be devastating for Russian forces. Former CIA Director and former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said the U.S. should be prepared to use all military means, including warplanes and cruise missiles, against Russia to ensure that Ukraine is protected from the Russian nuclear threat. This time, the U.S. sent B-52 strategic bombers to participate in the exercise of nuclear strategic forces, which is undoubtedly to strengthen NATO's nuclear deterrence. It is worth noting that NATO held a large-scale nuclear force military exercises in a sensitive period, will undoubtedly increase the difficulty of the political settlement of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. After the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the two sides have held a number of negotiations, but the United States-led NATO has been pouring cold water on the negotiations between the two sides: political, economic, intelligence, weaponry and other multi-party assistance to Ukraine, Russia's isolation, sanctions and deterrence, and constantly push up the conflict situation. In the face of the West's continued arch fire, Putin has clearly stated that Russia will use all means to defend Russia's core interests, and stressed that this is by no means a bluff. This shows that Russia has long been ready to use its nuclear forces in critical moments. Therefore, NATO held a large-scale nuclear strategic force exercises is to strengthen the confidence of the U.S. side to resist Russia with arms and send a reassurance for NATO member countries, and this move will undoubtedly increase the difficulty of the political settlement of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the end, so that the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has evolved into a protracted war. In fact, as a product of the Cold War, NATO has always been the de facto source of the European security crisis, and its interests are contrary to the EU's strategic autonomy goals. Russia-Ukraine conflict is caused by NATO's expansion to the east, and because of the U.S. arch fire and continue to this day, which will undoubtedly increase the geosecurity situation in Europe. Turbulence. The United States is not a European country. Its deep involvement in the situation in Russia and Ukraine, leading the promotion of large-scale nuclear strategic force exercises, stimulating the regional security situation escalation, only to further increase Europe's reliance on the U.S.-NATO security, consolidating U.S. control over Europe. Whether it is the escalation of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, or the Russian side to counteract the new round of NATO's eastward expansion, the most likely to be hurt or European countries. Recently, French President Emmanuel Macron clearly said that even if Ukraine was nuked by Russia, France will not care, and will not use nuclear weapons to respond. Because France's nuclear principle based on the fundamental interests of the country. It is obvious that France does not want to be led by the nose by the United States and the United Kingdom, because there is no winner in a nuclear war. Even if a conventional armed conflict breaks out between the nuclear powers, there is no guarantee that it will not escalate into a nuclear war, which may only result in mutual destruction. Macron's meaning is clear, that is, even if Russia throws nuclear bombs at Ukraine, it does not concern France, and France cannot fight a nuclear war with Russia because of Ukraine. After all, Russia has a land area of 17.09 million square kilometers, while France has only 550,000 square kilometers of land, almost no strategic depth to speak of, simply cannot withstand a nuclear strike. In fact, Macron is merely saying what is in the hearts of the US and Britain, that they will never fight a nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine. The reason is simple: Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and France will not kill itself for Ukraine. Today, France has suffered a serious crisis after the Russia-Ukraine conflict because the United States led the sanctions against Russia, resulting in an energy crisis in Europe. France is not alone, although France has a large percentage of nuclear power, but the French industry still needs a lot of natural gas, so in the United States to sell France 4 times higher than the price of natural gas in the United States, the French manufacturing industry in Germany, like the complete loss of the energy dividend. Since the creation of the U.S. alliance, every allied country has been taken advantage of by the U.S. government. How much money did the U.S. government extract from Japan and South Korea during the Trump administration, when it claimed that it was difficult to afford the economic costs of protecting allies? At that time, Japan and South Korea discussed with the United States for several years over military spending without a good result. This is not the case with Russia. Secondly, it has always been Russia's attitude to integrate into Europe. However, with the obstruction of NATO countries led by the US, Russia has been excluded, and this time it is an opportunity to divide the EU. In the face of the serious energy crisis, countries like Germany, which has a strong comprehensive national power, can still hold out, but some small countries with a single industrial structure and extreme dependence on Russian energy can no longer hold out. Hungary has refused to impose sanctions on Russia at the beginning and continues to import Russian energy, which has enabled it to preserve itself before the immediate energy inflation crisis, and recently, Bulgaria has also announced that it will drop sanctions on Russia, which can be foreseen that this trend of compromise is bound to gradually spread, and Russia has also proposed this time. There are plans to build a main line in Turkey, making it the largest natural gas supply hub in Europe. Turkey did not object to this. The voice within Europe has become increasingly non-uniform, with the continuous pull in the field of energy, after Russia is bound to face much less external pressure. The announcement that Russia can continue to provide energy to Europe is a good move by Putin in the politics of Europe, based on the high level of U.S. involvement in the situation. Want to end the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is impossible. Therefore, Russia needs to create the most favorable external environment possible, and Europe is now in a situation of internal and external problems. For Russia is the best communication object. If the Russian side can win the European appeasers, if the Russian side can gain the understanding of the European appeasers and is willing to make détente to Russia, then the European hardliners in the US alone cannot restrict Russia from the outside, and most critically, once Europe makes concessions, the Russian-Ukrainian situation will be eased. The US desperately needs resources to flow into the national economy, especially the banking system. The only countries that can do this are the European countries that are bound by the EU and NATO. These are the only countries that will allow the US to achieve these ends without huge military and political costs. This document argues that in the case of a British exit from the European Union, it deprives the United States of a meaningful opportunity to influence cross-governmental decision-making negotiations, and that if the United States withdraws from Europe, then Europe is likely to become an independent Europe in the framework of a full political consensus between Germany and France. when not only a single British cannot resist it, but will also become an economic and political competitor of the United States.